So we find ourselves in Daniel as we continue in Daniel. And today's text is chapter 4, which is 37 verses long. It's very lengthy, and I went back and forth. Do I read just a part? Do I read all of it? And because I realized I would spend just as much, if not more time trying to frame it if I didn't read all of it, I've decided to read all of it. And I also have my granddad's voice in the back of my head. Problem with church is there's not enough Bible. So yeah, I'm going to fix it. And if you don't like it, then you're the problem with the church. So yeah. I hope so. I'm having a hard time getting past the ray of brilliance. Like it's gonna. Right. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that live throughout the earth, may you have abundant prosperity. The signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me, I am pleased to recount. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his sovereignty is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was living at ease in my home and prospering in my palace. I saw a dream that frightened me. My fantasies in bed and the visions of my head terrified me. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me in order that they might tell me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the diviners came in, and I told them the dream, but they could not tell me its interpretation. At last, Daniel came in before me. He who is named Belteshazzar, or however you may pronounce it, after the name of my God, and who is endowed with the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream. O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that you are endowed with the spirit of the holy gods, and that no mystery is too difficult for you. Hear the dream that I saw, tell me its interpretation. Upon my bed, this is what I saw. There was a tree at the center of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew great and strong, its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the ends of the whole earth. Its foliage was beautiful, its fruit abundant, and it provided food for all. The animals of the field found shade under it, the birds of the air nested in its branches, and from it all living beings were fed. I continued looking in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and there was a holy watcher coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said, cut down the tree and chop off its branches. Strip off its foliage and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from beneath it and the birds from its branches, but leave its stump and roots in the ground with the band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let him be bathed with the dew of heaven, and let his lot be with the animals of the field and the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a human, and let the mind of an animal be given to him. And let 7 times pass over him. The sentence is rendered by decree of the watchers. The decision is given by order of the holy ones, in order that all who live may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdom of mortals. He gives it to whom he will and sets over it the lowliest of human beings. This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw. Now you, Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation, since all the wise men of my kingdom are unable to tell me the interpretation. You are able, however, for you are endowed with the spirit of the holy gods. Then Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar, in case you'd forgotten, was severely distressed for a while. His thoughts terrified him. The king said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or the interpretation terrify you. Belteshazzar answered, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you and its interpretation for your enemies. The tree that you saw, which grew great and strong, so that its top reached to heaven and was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose foliage was beautiful and its fruit abundant, and which provided food for all, under which animals of the field lived, and in whose branches the birds of the air had nests. It is you, O king. You have grown great and strong. Your greatness has increased and reaches to heaven, and your sovereignty to the ends of the earth. And whereas the king saw a holy watcher coming down from heaven and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the ground with a band of iron and bronze in the grass of the field, and let him be bathed with the dew of heaven, and let his lot be with the animals of the field until 7 times passes over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and it is a decree of the Most High that has come upon my lord, the king. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the wild animals. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen. You shall be bathed with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdom of mortals and gives it to whom he will. As it was commanded to leave the stump and the roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be reestablished for you from the time that you learn that heaven is sovereign. Therefore, O king, may my counsel be acceptable to you. Atone for your sins with righteousness, and your iniquities with mercy to the oppressed, so that your prosperity may be prolonged. All this came upon King Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, and the king said, is this not magnificent Babylon, which I have built as a royal capital by my mighty power and for my glorious majesty? While the words were still coming, still in the king's mouth, a voice came from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is declared, the kingdom has departed from you. You shall be driven away from human society, and your dwelling shall be with the animals of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you have learned that the Most High has sovereignty over the kingdom of mortals and gives it to whom he will. Immediately, the sentence was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven away from human society, ate grass like oxen, and his body was bathed with dew of heaven, until his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers and his nails became like birds' claws. When that period was over, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. I blessed the Most High and praised and honored the one who lives forever. We're so close to the end. For his sovereignty is an everlasting sovereignty, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are counted as nothing, and he who does what he wills with the host of heaven and the inhabitants of the earth. There is no one who can stay his hand or say to him, what are you doing? At that time, my reason returned to me. My majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. My counselors and my lord sought me out. I was reestablished over my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are truth, and his ways are justice, and he is able to bring low those who walk in pride. If you blacked out for part or all of that, quick recounting of the story. King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, huge tree, covers everything, provides for everything. A holy watcher descends, says, cut it all down. And then we learn in the dream that the tree is actually a human who's going to be sent out and become like an animal for 7 times, which is 7 years essentially. Can't figure it out, tries to get other people to help him. And of course, Daniel, who just two chapters ago interpreted a dream. So I don't know why he didn't call him first, but he's there last and tells them, this tree is you. You have grown great and remarkable. and you're going to be cut down. You will be banished. You will eat grass like an oxen. The dew will wet your hair until you turn your eyes to heaven, and then it'll be restored to you after 7 years. And then 12 months pass, which is a strange thing the first time I read it. Takes a year, but aptly he's on his deck of his house looking over the kingdom and says, wow, this is great. And the words are still in his mouth when a voice from heaven comes, banishes him. He goes, long hair like eagles, needs fingernail clippers, long claws. And then he turns his eyes and he's brought back. And then it ends with this doxology. His works are truth. His ways are justice. He's able to make lowly those who walk in pride. Okay, so that was a lot. I'm curious. What stuck out to you? What did you notice? If Daniel were here today, what are the kinds of questions you'd want to ask him about this story?
I was just struck by the whole process of dream interpretation to begin with. Like, how did he know that these other people were not interpreting it correctly?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like, is it like, yeah, no, that's not it. Like, how does he know? Like this whole process is, and then how did he know that Daniel's was right? You know, or yeah. So it was odd.
Yeah. It's not short of odd, that's for sure.
I think also just the mechanism of how he is dethroned, I guess. Like, okay, you're gonna go eat with the oxen now. It's just kind of, it's not like, was there a war? Was there somebody who, like a historical thing? He's just, I guess he went mad, or I don't know.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, and that line, given the mind of an animal, is strange. I wonder what people in the kingdom thought when he just disappeared. There's so many questions, right? This is a dumb chapter, Daniel. Oh, you don't have a microphone, can't talk yet. Go ahead, Jen.
Well, it makes me think about like Pharaoh, when the wise people tell him that someone's going to be taking his throne, and like he fights tooth and nail to make sure that that doesn't happen by like killing any possible baby that could grow up and take his throne. So it's just so weird that Nebuchadnezzar's like, okay, that must be right. Yeah. Like, and this is the same guy who's like, you have to eat what we eat. And Daniel's like, no thanks. And he's like, you have to bow down to this, and I'm gonna throw you in the fire. And then he's like, I'm gonna be outcast for 7 years. Okay. So weird.
Charles, do you want to talk now? Okay. Pass that to Sarah.
I think what was weird is I was listening to it thinking that sounds legit, because
Been there.
when it was like when we moved overseas, I talk about this a lot, like role deprivation is like a real thing, like going from you are someone and you have a job and you have a bank account to no one knows who you are. You do not have a bank account. No one gives a crap about what you used to do. Like, it is a huge mind shift. And if there are things that you have like worked for and they've not turned out the way you wanted them to, or he's like looking out and he's like, this is so great. And if all of the things that you feel like are so great are taken away from you, it feels like you're being turned into an animal and being cast out. Like, it sounded, I was like, yep, that's what it's like being in the field, growing your hair long, needing nail clippers. Like, no one cares about me. No one knows me. Like, that's what it feels like.
Great.
Sorry. Yeah. What?
Thanks, Sarah.
I was just gonna say, like, Because an eagle's feather, that hair doesn't sound that long. So
Right, yeah. Well, for some in the room, it's pretty long, Ryan.
I think in the 80s, a lot of people paid good money for eagle's feathered hair
Uh-huh.
and luscious locks. There's a few rock stars that may have had the same affliction. But no, I was this was kind of a comment I had from last week that I think applies here. And last week we were talking about capitalism, and I had to leave church early to go accept a furniture delivery.
Wow.
Yeah. So in the midst of my self-loathing over that, I couldn't even stay to hear the end of the lecture on the evils of capitalism because of my consumerism.
Go home and cry on your expensive couch.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully it shows the depths of my soul. No, but I was thinking about this last week, and again, I think in this story as well. A couple of years back, I had this weird thing that I decided to do, which was to try and read a lot of ancient texts, but non-Bible ancient texts, just to kind of get a sense of what the rest of the world was talking about back then. And so it started with the Iliad and the Odyssey and a couple of others, but I read really for the first time ever the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that one, which is probably from a similar dating time frame as Daniel was written. And this is, I confess, the first time I've actually read Daniel since I read the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it's just been kind of washing over me a little bit the last couple of times. Like, there are so many similarities in the writing structure here that, you know, I think this is, and maybe this is widely known, that, I mean, I think this is Babylonian poetry that we're experiencing here. And Babylonian poetry, as I was kind of learning, the translator of the Epic of Gilgamesh had kind of a whole, you know, essay at the end about this. It's very spiral in its story. In fact, the Epic of Gilgamesh is almost unintelligible at points. And because this repetition and rhythm, like there's this story about this journey, and it literally basically says, you know, they woke up, they ran as far as they could, they stopped, they got dinner, they slept in a tent. And it says that same story, I think 20 times in a row. To where I literally thought Audible was broken, like something was wrong, because it is literally the same, like 200 words, 20 times in a row. And he actually talks about that this rhythm, this timbre of the story is meant to convey something in this poetic style that they're doing. And so whether it was last week when we had the trumpet and the lyre and the et cetera, you know, that was happening. Yes. Yeah. Which woe to the other instruments that, you know, we listed 8 and then and then all the other ones, you know, it didn't even make the top list worth repeating. That's right. And we see it here as well, you know, when they're kind of repeating what's going to happen to him, and when we're framing the story around it. And so I don't have some killer takeaway from that, but, you know, the ray of light we'll wait for. But
Ray of brilliance.
Ray of brilliance, forgive me.
Yeah.
But I've been just trying to let that the last couple of weeks wash over me a little bit, rather than just sort of like wrestling with like, oh my gosh, we're hearing about the same instruments or the same things that are going to happen. But sort of let that, what is that story? What is the repetition of that, you know, sort of poetically bringing to me? So.
Thanks, Miles. The Miles Cullen story.
Hello. I think I was thinking about old Nebi and just the pattern of the first 4 chapters. Nebuchadnezzar coming up against the power of God and then forgetting or resisting, and just this, that's maybe part of the, like a bigger spiral, the spiral within which these smaller stories are, where Nebuchadnezzar is coming up against the power and faithfulness of the God of Israel, and then forgetting it, in chapter 3, reinterpreting the dream, being like, nope, I'm going to be here forever. And then being humbled when Rakshak and Benny are delivered. And in this chapter, being humbled again.
Yeah.
It's like the heights of human power have to continually be reminded that they are not the height of power at the end of the day.
That's really good. Thinking of the hero's journey, it's like King Nebuchadnezzar goes through the cycle and just rinse and repeat. It's not like a new thing. It's the same thing, just again. But I always want to be a little judgmental, like, oh, what an idiot. Like how, but then I look at the data of my life and it's a pretty similar cyclical pattern of not getting it.
I needed it to just be Nebuchadnezzar.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I had a 5-minute sermon, so this is good. Like I needed this filter.
Just kind of along the same lines, though, I'm thinking about the 12 months that transpired between the interpretation of the dream and the actual story. And I'm wondering if maybe in that moment when he heard the interpretation of the dream and he saw how freaked out Daniel was to give him this message, which also I wonder if maybe that was how he judged the authenticity. If all of the other guys were like, this dream means that you're the greatest and that you should give me a raise. And I don't know. And just you're not going to like this. But it makes me wonder if he took it to heart initially and he was like, oh, okay, I better check myself. Cause I remember just last week, I tried to throw those guys in the fire and it didn't work out. And, right. And so it took a year but it did happen. And just that one night when he was just like, you know what? I'm pretty awesome. And this is great.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And God's the whole time like, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen. Thanks, Ted. Oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
Sorry, the microphone
Fumble on
dropped.
the play. Okay. Yeah, it reminds me of if missionaries go and talk to people in a culture where dreams and miracles and other things are really prevalent, they're very quick to be like, yeah, all this Bible stuff sounds great, but it just kind of merges with everything that they already believe, because they already believe that all of these wonderful miraculous things could happen. And I'm wondering how many dreams does Nebuchadnezzar have? How often is he dreaming? How often is he asking for interpretations? What are the interpretations? How often are people rescued from fires? It all seems really fantastical to us, but I wonder if to him at the time, it was just one other thing in all of the. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I don't know. And I'm curious, but.
So as we were reading the story, all I kept thinking about was this song that me and my kids like to listen to by the singer-songwriter named Jalen. And I'm not going to read all the lyrics, but this is how it starts. In a distant land lived a mighty king, and he asked his men for a magic ring that could serve him in both his misery and joy. They go looking for the ring. I'm skipping ahead. And then so this is what he gets. How the servants' hearts did swoon and sing as the wise man carved into a ring. This too shall pass. So that's kind of the idea of the song. And then it goes on and you see this story of this king and how everything passes. So
we lived in Bellingham, Washington for 3 years. If you don't know the West Coast, Bellingham is just south of the Canadian border on the I-5 corridor, city on a hill that overlooks the San Juan Islands. It's just a gorgeous, small, weird little town. I was minister there at a small church that had a soup kitchen long before I got there. Every Tuesday and Thursday, they'd open up their doors at 8 a.m. And folks experiencing homelessness could come in and take a shower, wash clothes, have a meal, often, unironically, soup, as it was called, Soup's On. So every Tuesday and Thursday, I would spend my days sort of going between my office and folks coming in and talking, or just walking around with a cup of coffee. I hadn't spent a lot of time with my neighbors who fell in that demographic before. I had ideas about them, some that had changed, some that had not. Most of these thoughts and ideas I never said out loud. But I learned some pretty valuable experiences over those 3 years as the Soup's On clients became neighbors and friends. I've got some crazy stories that I'll share another time. But over time, what I had assumed and held, but not really voiced, this notion that it was laziness or poor choices that got them on the street, or some combination, was often a series of unfortunate events outside of their control. What I assumed was hard work and determination that kept me off the street was really the fortune of having so many safety nets in my life that getting on the street would just take a lot of work. I came in believing that if I just pointed my homeless neighbors to the resources available to them in the community, then they'd slowly find their way into homes of their own. But the truth of the matter is that the system that they're in often holds them captive, requiring that they either learn to game or cheat the system to get even the smallest resources, or continue to stay captive to that very system. And this isn't to get into a conversation about the causes and effects or the remedies to the problem of homelessness. I don't want to get into that. I mention these things for this simple truth. I came into that time of life and that ministry believing that I had something to offer to them. And what I discovered as I became friends and learned from these neighbors is that I needed them to better understand the truth about my life. And B, I was on third base in life, not because I hit a triple, but because I was born there. It was these neighbors, those captive to the systems and the traumas and the history of their life, that helped me see myself and my place in the world in ways that I could not have seen or known or come to realize on my own. Now, our friend, Belteshazzar, Daniel, is the author of a book in arguably the most famous book in history, which is why I often forget the reality that Daniel was a captive. He's not there by choice. He was conscribed into this role. He is a foreigner in Babylon. He is an outsider. He doesn't even get called by his name. They give him a name that's reflective of the Babylonian god. Which is why it makes sense that he's a little bit terrified to tell King Nebuchadnezzar the truth about this dream. You don't want to break bad news to the boss, especially when bad news could get you executed. Especially when you're not there by choice. And yet, it is this captive, Daniel, who has the eyes to see King Nebuchadnezzar for who he is and to speak the truth about it. It is the captive who delivers the message that you, King Nebuchadnezzar, are not God. You're just arrogant, and you are dependent on others like birds of the air, cattle of the field. This is a story of human arrogance coming against the truth that we're all not the next best thing to slice bread. So I'm curious, and this is a tough question, so we might need a few minutes of silence for you to think about it, or ignore it and don't answer it, and we'll move on. But I'm curious, in what ways have you experienced this? Where someone or someones who others, or maybe even you yourself, perceived as outsiders or on the margins, revealed some truth about yourself and your place in this world that you couldn't have otherwise known or seen. Maybe revealed arrogance or dependence on others, or perhaps revealed that you're not, in fact, the next best thing to slice bread. I'm curious, how have you experienced this in your life?
Perhaps I'm thinking about this because we just spent the night on the football field of SMU, but my time at SMU, when I got there, I thought I'm a pretty good writer. Like I know how to do this. I'm gonna be fine. But I got my first B ever in my literary theory class. And he was like, the professor took me aside and was like, you need help with your writing. It is not up to the level of where we expect a graduate student to be. And I was like, oh, okay. And I realized, oh, I'm a remedial student here in graduate school, and I'm not top dog like I thought I was. That was a big blow for me because I kind of had a big identity around writing too. And we worked on it, and I got put in a different class that a teacher who would just tear my writing to shreds every week, and it made me better. It was awful, but it did make me better. But that was a really hard one for me.
Thanks, Megan.
It's not really like somebody on the margins telling me this, but it's a similar feeling of self-loathing. When I came back from Mexico, I got certified, got emergency certified to become a teacher. And my second year, they moved me to a monolingual classroom. And so like my first year I'd had a co-teacher. And so like somebody else who also was her first year teacher, but she was amazing. And might have been her second year, but it was just me. And I was put on a growth plan that year. And it was one of those things where I kind of was like, I just kind of go through life going, I mean, it'll be fine. I'll be fine. It's fine. And I had the AP come in and say, this is not great. Like you need to like think about some stuff. And yeah, it was hard. It was a hard year.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
I think my favorite / most painful lesson and growth as a missionary, church planter person thing is around the dynamic of like, I don't know. I don't know if it's, sometimes it's explicit and purposeful, this understanding of mission and evangelism that like puts me up here
Mhm.
as the missionary
Mhm.
and puts my neighbors down here.
Mhm.
And I have the gospel and I know things and I have the best way of life. And I need to share that with you because you need that.
Mm.
I have something that you need. And consistently over the last 15 years, if it's unhoused neighbors, if it's my queer neighbors, if it is Iraqi Muslim neighbors, I consistently that assumption and presumption
Mm.
is consistently subverted
Mm.
by the beauty of their humanity and ways that Hassan welcomed me into his home at 11 o'clock at night, or showed up with several of his friends to help me move into, my house, a grueling thing for no reward, just because he was a really good human being, like consistent expressions of the kindness and love of God that I, in my arrogance and in my formation, did not expect to see, because my imagination had me up here and my neighbors down here.
Mm. Thanks, Charles.
Yeah, thanks. That reminded me of also our time in Bellingham. That that time there, I'm gonna face more of you. um that time there really transformed how I thought about myself, because I too felt like, like I'm a Christian, like I have things to give the world. And clearly, as Christians do. And we participated in something that helped us connect with our neighbors. And so we ended up in a lot of cool ways connecting with some people that lived nearby and started working on a community garden together. And like that experience helped me understand, just like Charles, that that I have not cornered the market on the ability to help others, or wisdom, or, kindness, or generosity, or, like caring for the earth, or, and I just learned so much from people who did not profess to believe in the God that I believed in. And yet I felt like I learned more about God from them.
Thanks, Jen. One last one with Sarah.
I can't even remember what day of the week this was, but it was a day this week. Thursday. Yes. Thursday was a truly terrible day in our house. Some big things happened in the morning, and then in the afternoon. Anyway, Ryan and I had to be somewhere else. And Charles offered to come over to the house and help with the girls. And I wasn't there. And Ryan, I was like, okay, just make sure clean it up a little. And I come home and Charles is there and Ben is there, and they've put our kids to bed, they put the girls to bed, and Our house is literally a disaster area. I do not even know how to explain how completely messy it is, because the girls are just, it's like popcorn and like nowhere to sit, almost nowhere to stand. And it's been like, we had that crazy experience overseas where I just felt like I was continually like, God was like, you are not a big deal. You are not a big deal. You are not a big deal. And I've had that experience continually with the kids when they're just like blurt things out that I would rather keep private or anything else. And it's like, God's like, you're not a big deal. You're not a big deal. Don't worry. And then like even Charles and Ben sitting in the house, and I was just like, oh my God, this is like my worst nightmare, that people that I work with and that I respect. And one time Ben was like, I think of you like a spiritual mentor. And I was like, oh my goodness, this person, they're all seeing my house and it's awful. And no one's going to think of me as anything now because it is terrible, truly terrible. And I, like, those are all the thoughts that went through my head. And then it was like, God, like was saying, you're not a big deal. It's fine. And I calmed down because like I've had so many experiences of God being like, you're not a big deal. Calm down. It's fine. And I wish I didn't have to be embarrassed. But I'm okay with it because I'm not a big deal and that's fine. But God is just continually surprising me with how the new lows he can bring me to. Just when I think I've gone as low as I can. Okay.
Thanks, Sarah. It's a stunning. It's hard for me to see in the midst of all the repetition and how long it is. But there is this remarkable, stunning hope in this chapter that, as it's clear, this is trying to bring down Nebuchadnezzar a bit from the lofty tower that he sits in. That underneath all of that is a God who still holds King Nebuchadnezzar, and that all hope isn't lost. Some roots are left for the chance of growing again. And this to me feels like really, really good news in the midst of my own sort of spiral. I don't know if I could get any worse. I can, A, but B, God's like, that's okay. There's a new day that's dawning. I mean, central to our life together is this desire, this longing to be connected to our neighbors, particularly those who are on the margins. And this is important. Daniel wants to remind us, not just because we have something to offer them, but we see ourselves more clearly and we see our place in the world more clearly through them. I know Daniel wrote it, and so he gets to write it from his perspective, but it's fascinating that he writes it from Nebuchadnezzar's perspective. I, King Nebuchadnezzar, give this testimony. And however it all played out, I don't know, but it is King Nebuchadnezzar in the midst of his arrogance, whether it was fleeting or not, that invites Daniel, that asks him, no, please tell me what you see, even if you're terrified, or it might terrify me, tell me, which is why we're invited into the world, which is why we're invited to our neighbors, because we get to see ourselves a bit more clearly, even when it's terrifying. And we get to discover our place in the world, even though it's terrifying. And we get to experience once more the hope that even at our lowest, a new day is dawning. And there are holy watchers who hold us up and give us a second chance. Let me pray. God, for the gift of Daniel today, for the gift of our neighbors, past, present, and future, through whom you reveal yourself to us, through whom we see ourselves more clearly, through whom we better understand our place in this world. We give thanks for all of them. May we have eyes to see and ears to hear, and the gift of open hearts to invite our neighbors more into our lives, and be hospitable and receive what our neighbors have to offer us. For the sake of the truth that we are all your beloved children. May your peace and your presence rest with us as we seek to be your people in this world. We pray these things through Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever, world without end. Amen.